Welcome to Keep the Bastards Honest, the podcast of the Australian Democrats. I'm your host, Elana Mitchell, and we're back in the podcasting studio. Firstly, apologies, dear listeners, for our impromptu hiatus after the election. As you'll hear in this episode, the election was a lot, and it's taken a few weeks for the dust to settle and for everyone to be available to have a post-election chat and assess how our new government is travelling. Scheduling would not allow for all of our Senate candidates to regroup for a chat, but Steve and I were joined by Victorian Senate candidate Leonie Green. Leonie, Steve and I pay our respects to the traditional owners of the lands upon which we're recording and their elders past and present. Sovereignty never ceded. Before we get cracking with this, I do want to make a shout out to one of our listeners, Aaron Crooks, who reached out to the Twitter team and just said, hey, is the podcast ever coming back? And instantly became my new favourite for not only listening to us, but also caring enough about the podcast to ask about it. So, Aaron, this episode is dedicated to you. Thank you for listening. So, Steve and Leonie, unfortunately, Roger and Luke couldn't make it tonight, so we'll just get the three of us in to do a bit of post-mortem on the election and the last sort of couple of months since the election and see, go through the seismic shift that Australian politics has been through and see where we're tracking. And Leonie's got some exciting news in Victoria that we'll get to, I'm sure. Steve, how are you feeling post-election? Like, have you recovered?
Have I recovered? Yes. So, I mean, for me personally, the election was, an incredible experience. I will say that. I was deeply honoured to be selected as a candidate in New South Wales. I was equally honoured to be selected as the first name on the Senate ticket in New South Wales. But I was also honoured to have that opportunity to get out and represent the party in public. I really enjoyed the opportunity to go out and talk to people. I talk to people all the time, but this time I had a good excuse to do it. And to go into cafes, to go into the local butcher shop, to go into a retail store, wherever I happen to find myself, and speak to those people and ask them how they were doing and try and understand what the issues were that were impacting them, whether that was, how the economy was tracking or their ability to find workers or whatever it might have been. And it really did vary. But I really enjoyed that opportunity. And it's a real honour to be able to do that as an Australian Democrat Senate candidate in a federal election. That means and continues to mean a lot to me. It was also the culmination of a good 2 years' effort getting the party ready to stand in the election, working on a number of different policy platforms, working on building up our membership, helping in those areas to try and make sure that the party was in as good a position as we could be going into that federal election. And so at the end of it, although we weren't successful and I wasn't successful, as I said to you before we started recording, I lost. I'm not a senator in the federal parliament as much as I wanted to be. I also spent those 2 years wanting politics in Australia to be different, wanting our representation in Australia to be different. The reason I started in the first place is because I was disaffected and disappointed in the way in which the coalition was governing the country. And after the 2019 election, I really couldn't bear the thought of sitting back, not getting involved and allowing them to win another election. I just couldn't stay on the sideline. So from that point of view, even though, I wasn't successful, Australia has shifted course. So in that regard, that was wonderful. That part of it was really, really good. And I know we're going to talk about what the last 8 weeks with an ALP government has been like, but there's I'm still unpacking my own feelings in terms of how do I feel about how the party went, how do I feel about how the election went as a whole. Seeing the new representatives stand up and give their maiden speeches over the last week has been deeply moving. It's been wonderful to see, and I'm also really motivated to stick with it, stay at it, and in 2025 be pushing again to try and get an Australian Democrat elected.
Awesome. Leonie, you unfortunately, I think, fell ill in the final week of the campaign, which was just devastating. So obviously, thankfully, you're nicely recovered and everything now, but how was everything for you?
So COVID got me at the last. So that last week was not fun. It was amazing what we were able to do online. And that reminder of, I think the classic was the virtual tour, effectively, of Bendigo that we did, because we were supposed to be there in person. So we were able to flip a whole lot of things to virtual, I should say. Everything that Steve just said really rang true. I think the day after the election, I had this sense that I could breathe again, and I don't think that's because I was campaigning. Really had nothing to do with that. It actually just had this, I just felt like I exhaled, like I had been holding my breath for more than 3 years, and I could let it go. And in fact, it's funny how often I've heard people use that analogy of they could breathe again, they exhaled. And I think as a country we have collectively exhaled, and things are just shifting in a new direction. And it's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen probably at the speed that a lot of people would want it to be. But there is a sense of hope again. There's a sense of transitioning to something that has more meaning and more depth. And like Steve has said too, the maiden speeches in the last week have just been an absolute joy. I have some new favourite politicians I've been following. My favourite one actually is a WA politician, WA independent, Kate Chaney.
Oh, she's wonderful.
Amazing, amazing maiden speech. And each of those maiden speeches, each of those independents, to see those independents actually stand up, and this is a Democrats podcast. I wanted the Democrats in the Senate, clearly. But there is something that I keep seeing as analogous, I think, to what the independents are doing in the lower house and have the ability to do in the lower house. I've got to say part of it, again, like you were saying, Steve, I'm still processing all of this and what this means. In many ways, I was one of those people who was kind of almost gunning for a minority government. Kind of thought that was our opportunity to see real change at a different sense of speed and real conversations in that lower house. I think it's not going to happen in the way that we want it to. That group of independents will be fascinating and amazing to watch, but it's just not going to be quite the same as what it might have been with a minority government. Each time I hear them speak and what I see happening, I just have this sense of hope again, and just a sense of pride again, actually, about being an Australian. And that's a kind of strange thing to recognise, that I know that I wasn't feeling proud at all. I was feeling deeply embarrassed and deeply anguished, really, about where we were at as countries. So to just feel like we can breathe through it again, and to actually start having some conversations that are deeper conversations, and conversations that go to the heart of who we really are and what we do stand for and what we won't stand for, that's exciting to me. So Steve, I think we won. I think
we certainly won as a country.
Exactly. There is a huge win that we had in just seeing that overwhelming shift. And I think one of the things that I have often reflected on when people have asked me about what the campaign was like, and it was about having those conversations with people, the excitement of people wanting to talk politics, but it was an election that just had this different energy about it. There was a really clear sense of, we want change, we want something different. And that's different for everybody in terms of what they're looking for. But it was exciting to be a part of for that reason.
Yeah.
I sort of look on it just on that energy side of it. I haven't really seen or felt that since 2007. And prior to that, probably 1993, maybe 96, although the result in 96 wasn't anywhere like what I would want it to have been. But certainly in 93, I remember, like just a real interest and a real desire to see a particular result, and people actively working really hard for it was interesting to see. What about you, Elena?
Look, very much similar to you guys. I mean, as you said, Stephen, for you and I, it had been like 2 years of solid work to get the party ready, keep it registered. I mean, as we said in the very first episode of the podcast, the government sort of conspired to change the rules and try and prevent minor parties like us from running in elections. But we bucked that trend and sort of came back stronger than ever. And yeah, I also feel like I'm still processing. I remember like the sort of the first week after the election, I felt like I fell in a bit of a heap, and it was not in a bad way, but just in that sense of I felt like I had been pushing against the embedded corruption and malaise of the Morrison government for what literally were for years, and there's the dawning realization that government was gone, and that shift had happened, and all of a sudden I had nothing to push against. And I remember saying to our national president, Lynn Allison, that we were going to have to change our messaging quite drastically, not because we weren't interested in holding the Albanese government to account, because obviously we are, but just that the Albanese government is a completely different beast. It is not quite yet so overtly corrupt and incompetent as the Morrison government. And I was like, God, where do we begin? Like, and especially in that first week when Albanese and Penny Wong sort of hit the international trail and were quickly running around the world repairing all the relationships that the Morrison government had torpedoed over the last 3 years, and now being visible and visibly competent and as you said, Leonie, suddenly making Australians proud to be Australian again and not embarrassed and ashamed. That was a real sort of topsy-turvy time, sort of mentally and emotionally. I think not just for me, but I think for a lot of people in the country to go, oh, the PM's overseas and he's not embarrassing us on the world stage. And people, like other world leaders, are excited to see him. That was weird. In a really good way, but really weird. Even now, I was listening to the New Politics podcast yesterday, and shout out to Eddie and Dave, who always do a brilliant job. And Eddie is saying, and the PM commented on whatever issue it was that they were discussing. And then he cut to, and I sort of flinched. And then he cut to audio of Anthony Albanese, and I was like, oh yeah, that's right. I don't have to go into the fetal position whenever I hear Scott Morrison's voice anymore, because I'm not going to. That's delightful. And that novelty has not worn off.
Oh.
So, yeah, and same thing, like obviously we all desperately wanted the Democrats to get in and resume our place in the Senate. And the Democrats overcame a lot the last 2 years to get into a position where we could contest the federal election. There was a lot against us. And so I'm not sad that we lost, in quote unquote. I feel like, the federal election served as an extraordinary PR opportunity for us in reminding people that we exist and letting people know that we're back. And in a lot of cases, sort of reintroducing ourselves to a generation who probably don't remember us being in Parliament. I mean, that was worth its weight in gold in a lot of ways. Like having the Democrats logo on the ballot in every state except for Tasmania, so I should say every mainland state, was brilliant. And bumping into people at pre-poll who are going, oh, the Democrats, and being excited to see us back.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Yeah. Leonie, I have to name drop. I met Kate Chaney at pre-poll one day. And she's wonderful. I actually had a little bit of a fangirl moment at her because I used to live in Curtin. I grew up in Curtin.
Yeah, okay.
And was quietly devastated that I no longer lived in Curtin and could not vote for her.
Couldn't vote for her.
Because I would have. She was delightful.
It was a wonderful scene when Kate Chaney and 7 of the other new independents were sworn in together.
Yeah, that was beautiful.
And they were called in, sort of one by one, and Dr. Sophie Scomps in Mackellar in northern the northern beaches of Sydney was one of them. But Monique Ryan and who else was in that? Zoe Daniel and exactly right, and Kate Chaney as well. And they came in together and they swore their oaths. Di Lee was the other one who was in that group. I think from Fairfield in southwestern Sydney, which is where I grew up. It was a really nice moment to see them being sworn in together and to see the real, genuine excitement and pride of this wonderful group of 8 amazing people, 8 amazing women as well, standing up to represent their communities. It was really, really good to see.
Oh, it was so moving. Like I've never, and I don't think it's just that I'm politically sort of engaged, that I was riveted by the opening of Parliament this time around. I feel like the whole country was riveted by it, and there was so much more media attention and so much more media coverage of it, because I feel like past opening parliaments has been, oh yeah, whatever, they're back at it again kind of thing.
But this one,
this one was, I think, really, really special, and not just the community independence, just so inspiring. What I'm most excited about for politics coming out of this election is that sense of the electorate has re-engaged with our politics in a big way. And, it's not just that we have these community-built independent movements sort of springing up. I think it's the realisation that the country had, that it's like, oh, no, we don't have to put up with this crap anymore. And also, not only do we not need to put up with this, we can hold our own politicians to a much higher account. We are not helpless victims of our political system. They represent us, and we can find people to represent us better if they don't meet our standard. And I think that's, the political system has actually come to grips with that yet. Certainly the new opposition has not. But I also think in some ways the Labor Party hasn't quite got meh. I think the next 3 years is going to be super interesting for them, because as a lot of people have noted, the Labor Party are not immune from a community-led revolt in their own seats as well. So they are walking a tightrope over the next 3 years.
I think it's entirely possible that history will show Cathy McGowan to be the most influential politician of the first half of this century, at least, if not this century, given the influence she has had over that community-minded and community-backed representative. And I hesitate to use the word independent, because they are community-backed. And I'd rather refer to them as that. They're not affiliated with a party. Fine. That part almost came second. The reason we have a representative democracy in this country is so that people can be voted for by their community to represent their interests on that national stage. And what Cathy McGowan has done in Indi to begin, and has helped spread into many other locations. I know, like we had a number of independents, these community candidates win, but there were a lot more who came close. There was some very close results where they didn't quite get up. Like there's a number in particular. Susie Holt in Groom springs to mind in Queensland. Georgia Steele is another who came very close. But it shows, I think, and Elana, to your point, I don't think the Labor Party is immune to these movements. If the community feels like they're not being listened to, if the community feels like their interests aren't being represented, that they're being overruled by or overridden by party politics instead, there is absolutely an opportunity for someone, within that community. And it's not the person within the community who stands up and garners the support. It's the community themselves standing up saying, we need someone to represent us, but we as a community aren't happy anymore. And I really do think, to your point, I don't think the dynamics have even begun to really play out, and I don't think the major parties have really wrapped their head around what it means for how our government operates.
Absolutely not. And, the Cathy McGowan model, I think, is so important because I forget where I heard this. It was on, I consume far too many podcasts and read far too much news to keep track of my sources, which is a terrible failing. But the point of the kitchen table-led discussions with the community were that, as you said, the community had that moment of going, no, we're not happy, and we need to do something about it. And so the point was to, I think, build the platform first, find the issues that the community were unhappy about and wanted solutions for, and come up with the solutions that the community wanted to implement. and then they bring a candidate, a suitable candidate in to lead that charge. But it was very much a case of the candidate comes last. And I think the fact that most of these movements were led by women is really, really telling, because it had that consultative grouping together thing. And I think it was one of the people who helped Kathy in the very, very beginning, and he said, men sort of got involved in the beginning, and their first thought was, we need to go find a candidate. And they got told very, very quickly and very, very firmly, no, we need to get the community behind us first. Because imposing what was inevitably going to be another middle-aged white man onto the community to represent them was going to fail. It had to be a bottom-up, community-led, this is the platform that, this is the foundation of what we want, and then we find someone who is willing to speak to that. And it's staggering in its success.
Leonie, Indi is in northern Victoria. Well, it actually sort of wedges up from the middle up. But do you think we're going to see a similar set of community-backed independents or candidates in the upcoming state election in Victoria?
It's already started. So
it has?
I think the advertisement certainly in Q, I think, was out on the weekend, which is where Monique Ryan has won. So that's pretty exciting to see. There's no difference, I think. No, let me take a step back. The Cathy McGowan model is so exciting, right? Because it's actually what politics is meant to be about. It's just that we've got these two historical major parties that are in the way of politics happening in the way that it should. And so Cathy has changed that, and it could have gone any way in this last election, in the federal election, but what we have seen through those successes, and we saw it actually prior to that too, in Cathy McGowan being able to really pass the baton to Helen Haines, that was an incredible moment of success again for a community-based, I want to use the word independent now, but community-based representative. I love that change of wording and narrative too, Steve. But again, seeing all of the successes, seeing that group of incredibly impressive women stand up and become part of this parliament just gives me this sense of politics is changing, the conversations that we are having are changing, the people who are interested in volunteering and getting involved in politics is changing. We saw that through the extraordinary number of volunteers that the independent candidate, the community representative candidates had in their backing. Now, I think there is an element of the Morrison government was so wanting that there was an extreme reaction to that on multiple fronts. I don't think that is the case in terms of where Victorian politics are at the moment. But what we have in Victoria is a Liberal Party that is just broken, completely broken. So we don't have an opposition that is ready to govern. It's fundamentally flawed. You disagree, Steve, or are you?
No, I think that is such a wild understatement of where the Liberal Party is in Victoria. They are every appearance, every single media appearance by them should be accompanied by, comedy clown music or the theme from the Benny Hill show or something.
Yeah.
It's just farcical.
It's awful. It's really, really awful.
Yeah,
I don't want to take away from your point, which is that, there is an opportunity.
I was going to say, you're being incredibly generous to them to say that they weren't ready to govern. I was going to say, you don't actually have a functional opposition over there. Never mind
They're
one
not
that can
ready to
actually
tie their shoes. Come on.
They're awful.
Oh.
And this is, well, clearly I like to be diplomatic in my use of language. Saying they're broken is pretty extreme for me, Steve.
Yeah, that is it.
It's quite funny. So yes, they are deeply problematic. How's that? I find them deeply problematic in terms of the state that they are in, and anything that they say or have to offer is Benny Hill music would possibly help. So there's that, but that in and of itself creates a problem as well. I don't want an opposition that is some of the oppositions that we have had previously. I don't want an opposition that is obstructionist. I don't want an opposition that just yells and shouts and is anti everything that the government wants to do. That doesn't work either. So this is not about I want an opposition that is saying something that's at least a sentence. What I want is choice, and that's where the opportunity lies for minor parties and for independents in this next election for Victoria. I think I am happy to put on record that I think Daniel Andrews has done an extraordinary job in extraordinarily difficult circumstances, and I love his social media team. His social media team should have huge awards because they are extraordinary in getting messages across. But I think he's been a great leader. I think he's been a great leader, and he has led consistently and clearly through something that I don't know what previous premier, and certainly not in my lifetime, had to lead through. So completely, that's where I stand. Having said that, I still want him to be held to account and his government to be held to account.
Absolutely.
And the current opposition is in no way, shape or form able to do that and have not done that. And so, yes, they're not ready to govern. They're also not ready to and have not been providing any alternate in terms of opposition.
No.
And so that is where the opportunity is. I don't understand how the Liberal Party at any level has not seen the writing on the wall prior to this election, but they didn't, and they still don't. If we look at some of the candidates they're putting up,
yeah.
You know, I'm probably a silver lining person, right? So silver lining and diplomatic in the way that I talk about things. The silver lining to me and my hope at the moment is actually that the Liberal Party just becomes a minor party at some point. Hopefully sometime soon, because that's kind of where they're going in terms of the interests that they are creating around them and their own branch stacking that they have done. The branch stacking that they have done is very much about very conservative religious right. Like that's where they're going.
We've seen the same in New South Wales, Leonie, like that shift with becoming a party of the Christian right seems to be the direction that they're heading. I don't think that's Victorian only, although we haven't seen it manifest quite so much yet in Victoria.
Yes, look, and WA is a lesson for all branches of the Liberal Party.
You would think.
Yeah, well, the WA branch was taken over by the religious right, and
the WA party can now show up to Parliament in a convertible
on a motorbike.
But maybe that's again, silver lining. Maybe that's kind of just where they're heading naturally, and that's okay. I am all for a diverse parliament, and if that's what people want to vote in, that's okay. But can we please be honest about it? Can we please be open about this is actually who the party is now? Yeah. Because the Liberal Party is not the party that it once was.
I think my concern, Leonie, is that we end up with the media representing the Liberal Party as a reasoned, balanced, informed option rather than this increasingly fringe set of beliefs and ideas, which is where they are. Like when you look at the majority of views that the Liberal Party espouses and the sorts of things that they're fighting for, they're representative of maybe 5 to 10% of the population sort of agrees with them. The media helps market them, if you like, to another 20 or 30%, which is how they end up with, 30%, 35% of the vote. But it's not because their views align or their ideas align or their policies align. It's because they've got a lot of help.
Well, isn't it just because the media are so used to having two major parties that they need to kind of provide some form of...
Yeah, it's that sort of horse race reporting. It's that sort of two-horse race view of politics rather than a realistic reflection of where parties reflect the electorate itself.
Yeah.
And that also means, sorry.
Oh, no, you go.
I was just going to say that is also the possibility or the opportunity that comes from the independents. because I've already seen far more coverage of what the independents are saying or doing than we saw from a Cathy McGowan or Helen Haynes time. There is it's kind of like that. Yes, they are not a party. This community representative group of independent people are giving that sense of there is another voice here that you need to listen to. There is another voice that you need to actually put into the media, and that will change. I think it's not going to change a certain portion of our
I think,
press.
Leonie, like one of the things, and Elena, I think it was you who mentioned it a few minutes ago. Those kitchen table conversations. There is nothing stopping the Labor Party from doing the same thing. There is nothing stopping the Greens from doing the same thing. There is nothing stopping the National Party or the Liberal Party from doing something similar, and just sitting down and listening to their electorates. Like absolutely zero stands in their way other than their entire model of representation. We don't really want to muddy the waters by going and asking people what they want, or what they're concerned about. We'd much rather tell them what they should be. We'd much rather tell them what they should be worried about and what they should be concerned about than ask them that question.
So I've got a couple of points. So Leonie, we were doing some Facebook advertising in Victoria for reasons that will become apparent very shortly. And our graphic designer reached out to me. On one of the ads, he had a picture of Daniel Andrews and of Matthew Guy. And he reached out to me and said, do you have any better stock photos of Matthew Guy? Because I can't find anything. And I said, no, I got nothing. And we actually had a laugh about how invisible the leader of the Victorian opposition was. Weird it was.
Tim Smith gets more airplay, actually, than Matthew Guy. Yeah, which is great for the Labor Party.
Yeah, and because when the first sort of ad creative came through for me to approve, I sort of reached out to our graphic designer and said, is that Matthew Guy? Is that Tim Smith? And he said, oh, no, it's definitely Matthew Guy. I double-checked because I wasn't sure as well.
There you go.
The agency we're going through, I think, are based in Sydney, and obviously I'm in WA, so both of us are a bit, not sure about this. So, which I think, again, is a reflection, as you said before, of how dysfunctional and how unfit for govern the Victorian Liberals are. And I've joked in the past many times on the podcast about WA just solving this problem by getting rid of our opposition altogether. But I don't feel that there's a long-term solution because, as you said, we need a functional opposition. And again, an opposition that, as you said, doesn't just oppose things for the sake of opposing things, but makes politics a contest of ideas. And I think oppositions around the country, whether they be federal or at state level, have forgotten that they perform a public service by presenting an alternative government to the people and challenging the government, holding the government to account, and presenting alternate ways of achieving the right thing for the state or the country or the local council or whatever level of government we're dealing with. And I feel like that's really been lost over the last 20 years. And the Albanese then opposition came under long and sustained criticism for the fact that they either weren't opposing anything or, the whole small target strategy that Albanese deployed in order to get through the election and win the election. And obviously having won the election now, everyone's like, oh, well, the man's a genius. But I think also in some ways it was a virtue of necessity, both like the circumstances over the last few years of the pandemic, the, array of people in media who were quite determined to prevent Labor winning this election. So he did have a very narrow sort of needle to thread there. But I also can't help but feel that by taking that small target strategy in opposition, not necessarily in the election campaign, but in opposition, Labor, I think, learned the wrong lessons in some ways from the 2019 loss, but also, again, failed in their duty to provide that public service of being a credible and functional opposition. Because really, and again, I'm not sad about this, they stepped back and allowed the Morrison government to fail. And it's that whole thing of never, ever get in the way of your enemy shooting himself in the foot strategy. And I can't fault Albanese for that. I mean, if the Democrats were in opposition and we were dealing with a government of the likes of the Morrison government, we too, as a matter of strategy, would probably step back and let them implode. But it does diminish our politics when that happens. And I think the electorate is seeing there is more than the two-horse race, that there are, you can have representation, an incredibly successful representation outside of the party system. And this I think, also like the two-party system, because we haven't even touched on how the Greens went to the election. And I think also there's a whole bunch of people who will now look at Parliament and go, oh, we can have representation from independent community representatives. We can have minor parties represent our communities just as well as the two majors. Like this whole default, oh, your vote doesn't matter because it eventually ends up with one or the other of the two majors at the end of the day, I think is a false binary. And I think it's finally been revealed as a false binary. And people are like, oh no, we can have a diverse and complex parliament, I guess, in terms of representation. It doesn't have to be two blocks of the same kind of people representing us. And that's going to make for a really, really exciting decade, I think.
Yeah, and we can have someone who is our representative, who is our person in our community, who knows and lives in and wants to serve our community.
Yeah.
As opposed to serve a party politic. Like it's just, that's the change. That's the refreshing, exciting possibility of what democracy in Australia could actually look like and is already starting to look like.
Because obviously the focus is on the community representatives who happen to be unaffiliated with parties at the moment. I think also there's a lesson here for minor parties, because one of the things that I found fascinating during the election campaign, and Catherine Murphy mentioned this a number of times across different forums, was that the independents, the community independents seemed to be filling the void that the Democrats had left. I did not hear the Democrats referred to in the media as often as I did during the election campaign. And what was funny to me was that it was completely divorced from the fact that the Democrats were running in that election. There was a lot of talk about our historical role in the parliament and the seismic shift that happened in the late 70s, early 80s, when the Democrats first arrived in the Senate, and then in 1983 when we took the balance of power for the first time, and the role that we served. And people were looking at the community independence and going, we haven't had a big split in politics like this since the Democrats turned up.
Because we were born out, in a similar way, we were born out of a failing, right?
Yeah.
We were born out of a failing of the Liberal Party.
Yes.
Don Chipp had enough. These independents, these community-minded community representatives, are doing exactly the same thing. They're saying enough already. This party is not the party that I would otherwise sign up to.
So here's a crazy idea, but this time I just checked while you were chatting. I just checked, and this Parliament, the 47th Parliament, has 62% male representatives, 38% identify as women, 62% are men. I think the 48th Parliament will be majority women.
Wow.
I think the 48th Parliament will have a majority of women MPs, because I think what we've seen in this election will go another big step forward, and a lot more people will be representing their communities, and those communities seem keen to select women as their representatives in a way that party politics seems to favour men.
Mm.
And if we continue just a little bit further down this path, I think we're going to end up with the 2025 election and the 48th Parliament seeing a majority of women for the first time in our federal parliament.
God, that'd be magnificent.
It'd be pretty amazing change, really.
Yeah.
And again,
it would be.
You have
it
to
would be.
tip your hat to Cathy McGowan. Like this change that we've already seen in this parliament, as you said earlier, Steve, that started with Cathy.
Yeah.
I think the major parties will be more likely to pre-select female candidates, or at least non-male candidates. I think the Liberal Party will almost certainly have to. I think the National Party will almost certainly have to. I think the number of the community-backed candidates will increase. It won't be 8 or 9 next time around. It'll be 15. You know, like it will increase. It will be interesting to see, but I almost feel like there will be a minority government in the lower house, and the only really strong showing you'll see will be in the upper house for the parties.
Yeah.
You know, the upper house will be the chamber of the parties, and the lower house will become the chamber of community representatives.
Which makes it even more. It makes it even more that, like, that is the role that the Democrats then need to play, right?
Yes.
That's where we've got to be, because that's where we can then make that difference.
Yes, I think you and I were both rushing in to make the same point. But no, you're right. And I would love the 48th Parliament to be as Steve just described. I'm not 100% sure that the Liberals will finally grasp the notion that they need to select women in time for the 48th Parliament. I think
they'll lose if they don't, and they'll lose to female independents if they don't.
Yes, they will. Oh, yeah, and look, your logic is completely sound. I'm not disputing your logic. I just don't think the Liberal Party are going to catch up to you in time.
They're not going to play the part that I've laid out for them. That's fair enough. That's fair.
Because I think, and look, we're judging very, very early in. I mean, Parliament's literally only came back the week that we're recording this.
Sure.
But judging by their first week in Parliament, it's very, very clear that the Liberal Party have learnt nothing from their defeat.
They've even come out and said explicitly that it's not them that needs to learn a lesson. It's the electorate that needs to better understand the Liberal Party. That's the problem.
Yes.
Which was a phenomenal takeaway for a federal election in which you lose government after three terms to go, I just don't think the electorate gets us. I think that's the problem.
Yeah, right. When that came out, a friend of mine reached out to me with it just to go, what? Like, did you see that? And I sent back to him the Simpsons meme of, is it me? No, the children are wrong. Because that's what it encapsulated. So on that basis, I'm not confident that the Liberals will have this sort of road to Damascus moment where they go, oh, we need to pre-select women if we want to remain relevant. Sure. I think they will come very, very close to being wiped out of Parliament before that necessary sort of introspection happens. And I think if they actually survive the 48th Parliament as a party, it'll be the 49th Parliament where they actually start to rebuild and actually hopefully sort of come back to being the party of Menzies, which is they've strayed very, very far from. And look, I'm with Leonie. I would love nothing more than the Liberals to be reduced to minor party status, and for them to actually be wiped out as a party altogether, because I'm going to fly my massive political biases high here. Sort of getting back to the point about the Senate, I do think that you are right in that because of the nature of the way the Senate vote occurs, it's next to impossible for an independent to be elected. David Pocock's achievement in being elected as an independent, first of all, is extraordinary. I mean, that is, and arguably, he could only have done that in the ACT. Even though the ACT only has 2 senators, that was the correct electorate to be able to vote an independent in. Like, in a bigger state where you have 6 senators who get elected each year, he would have had Buckley's, despite the fact that he was an excellent candidate and ran an excellent campaign and thoroughly deserves to be there.
You can maybe do it in a double dissolution election.
Yes.
Maybe. And even then it's hard. But you're right. Yeah.
So by the nature of the Senate, it will, you're right, it will default to being the chamber of the parties. But I don't think for long. I think the electorate will go, oh, no, that's unacceptable. No. We've broken the party duopoly in the lower house. We will not tolerate it in the House of Review, which is the Senate. Yeah. And I think then there will be the rise of minor parties again in the Senate, because they'll go, no, we want a diverse Senate, to work cooperatively with our diverse parliament, and having two-party majority in the Senate will be unacceptable to the electorate. Which is, as Leonie said, this is where we come in.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right.
Because I think the limitations of community-based representatives, because there are limitations, and again, it is not a reflection on the movement, it's not a reflection on the extraordinary candidates that they've put up and will continue to put up, but the Westminster system of government kind of needs to have parties in there. Like that's what it's designed around. And so we'll get to a stage where the community representatives will either have to make a very, very large coalition of representatives, which will become a party, by another name. Having seen a diversity of representation in Parliament, I think that would hopefully feed into a rise of minor parties as well, because the alternative is not, you don't have to reject political parties as a whole in order to find people to represent you properly.
If I use Helen Haynes' Integrity Commission bill as a model and take the major parties out of the equation. So think about the way that she has gone about developing that bill, with a lot of consultation, a lot of work with people like the Centre for Public Integrity, I think they're called.
Yes.
Working with independent groups, engaging with her parliamentary colleagues to put forward and improve and discuss, and she's been sort of working away at it. That could easily be a functional model of government in a lower house that doesn't have anything like even a large minority party in existence. If instead you had 156 community-backed independent candidates representing their communities, and people putting forward bills and working behind the scenes and debate and questions and all of that kind of stuff. I agree. We're not currently set up for it. The whole notion of how question time works and the idea of Prime Minister and all the rest of it would need to be revisited. But it represents some exciting shifts in the dynamic of the way in which our parliament operates, and I'm interested to see it.
Oh yeah, like to have like a minor part, not a minor party, a minor government, minority government. That's the word I was looking for. A minority government that, because in the past, minority governments have relied on the crossbench for to guarantee supply, and I see no reason why you could not then, like if the crossbench was 20 members big, why you could not sort of pick out the very best performers from that crossbench and bring them into your cabinet, and make Zali Steggall Attorney General.
You'd effectively need to, right? At some point.
Yeah. But make Monique Ryan the Health Minister. Why not?
I was hoping that one of those MPs from the crossbench would have been given the Speaker's role.
Yes.
Just as a symbol, just as a sign, we are paying respect to the crossbench. We are being open. We're sharing the reins of power and all of that kind of stuff. I was really hoping. We didn't see it, obviously, and I get that. Labor's in government, and they get to call those shots. But I kind of was hoping. But this is something that we saw with Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. Like her party won a majority government, and yet you have ministers from other parties in cabinet. And I love that model. I think it's great.
And it's not so alien to us, because the coalition, it's literally, they've essentially been doing that for decades. So when this sort of idea got floated and people were going, that's madness. No, you can't do that. And it's like, no, we have been for decades, because the Liberal Party, even when they actually won a majority and were able to govern in their own right, always have chosen to govern in coalition with the Nationals. And people overlook the fact that under the present sort of way things are constructed, only the Labor government, only the Labor Party has ever governed in their own right. Liberals have always governed in coalition with the Nationals, and essentially have always been a minority government. Just that we always see the coalition as a single party, and we don't click that, well, technically the Libs are in minority.
They're really not, yeah.
And, and the demonisation of the 43rd Parliament, where Julia Gillard ruled in minority, has really sort of poisoned the well for the electorate on terms of minority government, because apparently that's disastrous and it's chaos, and the country will fall to pieces if it ever happens. But New Zealand is a shining example of how a constructive minority government can work literally for decades. And other governments around the world, it is really, really common to govern in minor coalition. In Europe, in a number of European countries, but even in the UK, they frequently had coalition governments of where they've cobbled together 2 or 3 parties to make up government. And I think it can only be to our benefit for that model to emerge in Australia, because you need that diversity of ideas, and you need that that challenge of negotiating legislation through the House, because it only improves it.
Can we talk for a moment about how the ALP has been going in its first 8 weeks?
Yeah, let's do it.
It's had 8 weeks. It's time, like we do an interim report. First few days, sworn in as PM Monday morning, on a plane to Japan, I think it might have been, for a Quad meeting. Later that day, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese off on, I know we're going to rename it. He's a Rabbitohs fan, so it should be Rabbitoh 1 rather than Shark 1.
Oh dear.
God, but he's off to Japan to represent Australia, and that seems to have begun a pretty solid few weeks' work for him and Penny Wong, repairing Australia's very, very damaged reputation on the world stage.
Got to give them an A for that. That took everyone by surprise, I think. Yeah, everybody knew that the Quad was coming up and that he would have to be sworn in and basically bolt to the airport. So that wasn't a shock. But the deftness with which he handled his first overseas appearance as Prime Minister, I think took a lot of people by surprise.
Yeah, it was good. It was good to see.
He's done well. He did the country proud, brand new in the role, but and because people overlook the fact that Albanese is a very, very experienced political operator. Like, everyone sort of, there has sort of been this attitude of him being the PM on L plates, but it's like he's had a long apprenticeship. Let me put it that way. And Penny Wong at least has been foreign minister in the past, so she was sort of just putting that mantle back on and getting on with the job,
putting the cape back on, and
that's right.
Taking off. That was, yeah. I mean, that was really good to see.
Yeah. So great. So the first couple of weeks, extraordinary, just extraordinary work and extraordinary progress. No one expected, I think, that the speed at which they repaired those relationships to have been done, at quite that speed. Well done, Elana. And then on the domestic front, they sort of hit a few potholes. So the fact that they tried to continue with, Morrison arbitrarily cut off pandemic payments to low-income people just before the election and said, right, cut-off date's going to be 31st of July, we're done. And that the Labor government tried to continue running with that line, I think did them a great disservice. I understand why. I understand because, they are so paranoid about fiscal responsibility and getting the budget back under control and all that sort of stuff. But I feel like that was an own goal, because everyone's decided that the pandemic's over, and when I mean everyone, I mean the media and the political class. COVID hasn't got that memo yet. And as much as we all desperately want the pandemic to be over, we want to get on with our lives and pretend that a deadly virus is no longer circulating through the community, the deadly virus hasn't caught up with us yet and decided to disappear. And so the simple reality is, if you want to help people navigate that and not continue to spread the deadly virus, you're going to have to support them when they need to isolate and they don't have sick leave. That's just brutal reality. And trying to go, oh, well, the previous government put this in place and we can't change it, was unbecoming of them, I think, because it's like, well, what is the point of you being in government then? What did we just upend our political world for, if not for you to change stuff? So I was very disappointed with them over that. I was really glad that they backtracked and that they fixed it, and they've extended those payments out. That was an unnecessary own goal. And the other thing that got me also was trying to make out they couldn't afford it when the stage 3 tax cuts are still legislated. Absolutely had me seeing red. It's like, do not come at me with we cannot afford anything when is what, $120 billion worth of tax cuts for rich people still on the books? More?
It starts at 15.6 billion and increases up to 18 billion and beyond. It's ridiculous that it's still there. And some of the stuff that they're cutting back on spending is silly. Like you're not even talking about pennies in the context of a national budget. You're talking fractions of a percent, and going, yeah, well, we've got to curtail spending, so we have to be responsible. It's not credible.
No. I think also the fact that they made it really, really clear that they're not even going to look at raising job seeker.
I think a lot of people are disappointed at that. And this is the thing. I want to come back to the sort of broader, just for a moment, the broader election strategy of, small target and everyone going, look, let them get elected, and then when they're elected, then they can do this stuff. But until they get elected, they can't do it. If they come out with policies like raising the JobKeeper rate, they're going to get, slaughtered in the press. They'll never get into government. You've got to give them some air, please support the strategy, let them get elected. And they've been elected, and now it's like, well, what do you expect from them? They said during the election they weren't going to do that. Now you're trying to hold them to account for, well, this is why during the election we said, actually, we need you to promise this kind of stuff, because it's not okay. It's not okay that we have 1.2 million families in this country living in poverty. It's not okay that 1 in 6 children and teenagers are living in poverty in this country. It's not okay that as a matter of economic policy, we maintain a cohort of people who are unemployed so that we can wave the cautionary flag at insecure workers and say, well, at least you're not like them. We set the job seeker rate at poverty levels, like below poverty levels. I think it's like half the poverty line at the moment. And then say, well, look, we can't afford it. It's absolute bullshit. And it really is something that boils my blood, because we then sit there and say, yeah, well, it's already been legislated that we've got these tax cuts for high income earners, and that's good for the economy. And again, that's complete bullshit. It's not good for the economy at all. Like that money, and I'll benefit from it. Me personally, I'll benefit from the stage 3 tax cuts. I'll be better off to the tune of about $9,000 a year, $180 a week or so. Good on me. I don't need it. I just don't need it. I definitely don't need it more than some family that's living below the poverty line on $40 a day. It's obscene that we would sit there and go that 200,000 high-income earners need to get an extra $9,000 a year, and we at the same time sit there and talk about budget repair by screwing over low-income households. It's absolutely obscene.
And that's before we get into the high inflation environment that we're in, because $46 a day was obscene before cost of living went through the roof.
Yeah.
It is criminal now, and I've called it criminal in the past, but you understand the point. And do not come at me with this cannot afford it bullshit, while people like your good self, Steve, are due to, in 2024, are due to benefit to the tune of $9,000 a year.
Just don't need it. I'm doing just fine, thank you. Yeah. Use that money for something else instead. And there are, I'll happily pocket it. I'll happily pocket that money when people aren't living on the streets, when people aren't living out of their cars, when people don't have to choose between medicines to treat their chronic illnesses or food for their family. Those sorts of decisions, when those are all in the past, sure, by all means, give me a tax cut. But in the meantime, far out. Just put it where it's needed. It really is obscene that we're talking about $15 billion a year could fund an increase of the job seeker rate and the age pension up to the Henderson poverty line. Increase it to about $88.50, I think, is where the poverty line is at the moment. Costs about $12.5 to $13 billion a year. And I know that because we did it for 18 months during the early part of the pandemic. That's basically what it cost us.
Yeah.
$12.5 billion a year, not the $90 billion a year that we spent on corporate tax breaks to increase the asset tax write-off from 20 grand to 150 grand so that you could automatically write off an asset purchase, not that $90 billion, just 12.5. It is criminal. And for a new Labor government to come in, and this is the government that we want, that we think and hope will look after the little person, will look after low-income earners, will look after the worker, sits there and goes, oh, look, sorry, our hands are basically tied, we can't do it. Bullshit. Of course you can. Of course you can. And you should.
Maybe I'm being naive here, but I don't understand who it is that they're frightened of. I mean, like, sure, the Murdoch media are going to give them shit. The Murdoch media have been giving them shit literally for 50 years. Like, this is not a new environment for them.
They're not going to stop.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and also they're not going to stop if you kowtow to whatever bullshit is getting spouted on Sky News. So, where is the political cost going to come from in raising job seeker to a living wage? Because it's not going to come from the electorate. Most people, most reasonable people, I should say, having lived through the last 2 years of the pandemic, having seen queues around the block outside Centrelink of people who have never had to deal with Centrelink in their lives, that was a massive wake-up call for the nation. I don't think there's any political skin to lose, particularly now, in raising not just job seeker, but disability pension, age pension, all the payments to livable, because
we're not talking about a lot of money.
No.
Elana. Like for the people who are the recipients of those amounts, they're not. We're still not talking about a lot of money. We're talking about. We're still talking about people living at the poverty line. We're not talking about them rolling in $100 bills and smoking Cuban cigars. We're talking about them literally no longer having to choose between medicine and food, or whether or not they can fill the car with gas or petrol so that they can get to work. We're not talking about a great deal of largesse here. Like it's pretty basic stuff.
It's a small amount, but it was, we saw during the pandemic, it was transformative for those people. Like literally life-saving. So as a new government, surely those people, like if that happened in the term of government, surely those people would be pretty freaking happy about it and would be willing to park their vote with the government that saved their lives. Because those people aren't listening to the Murdoch press. They're too busy trying to survive.
Yeah.
And that's before so to go down another rabbit hole, that's before we get into the billions upon billions of dollars that we spend propping up the policing of poor people and trying to get them into work, which Rick Morton outlined to devastating effect in a piece in the Saturday paper a couple of weeks ago.
That really made me angry, that piece. It really did make me angry. I think he indicated in the article is something like $7.8 billion a year goes towards the employment industry. Let's call them that. But it was made quite clear in that article that that's not really what's happening. That essentially you've got an industry that is parasitic almost, and to the tune of billions of dollars. And again, I could find better things to do with those billions of dollars than spend it punishing people who are out of work because we've set the economy up such that they are always out of work. We can and we should do better. And I, along with a lot of people, I think were hopeful that the Labor government, when they came in, would at least indicate that they were going to do that kind of thing. And I'm so far disappointed that they haven't.
Yeah. To be fair, then they're 8 weeks in. But it's the kind of no-brainer stuff that I would have thought that, like a new government riding the crest of the honeymoon wave.
Yep.
would have done.
And I think, Elana, they could have come in and said, look, we're going to look at cancelling the stage 3 tax cuts. We're going to look at increasing the job seeker rate. We've got a job summit coming up later in the year. That's going to be one of the things on the agenda. Part of the way that we're going to fund it, we're going to cancel those tax cuts. They're not going to happen. We'll legislate. We'll work with the crossbench to cancel them out. We're going to look at, I don't know, a super profits tax on the oil and gas industry or the coal, oil and gas industry that are currently reaping billions of dollars in profit and not paying any tax on them. Let's keep some for the country. Like any number of those sorts of things that they at least indicated that they would be doing would be a positive step forward. But I think out of anyone, any group of people in this country looking at the new Labor government who have every right to feel disappointed, it's the unemployed for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And sorry, one more before we get off the economic high horse. Sure. and let Paul Leonie back into the conversation. One thing that has had me seeing absolutely red this week is the employment rate has fallen to 3.5%, and everyone's gone, isn't this amazing? It's so great. And I privately lost my shit. Sort of in the privacy of my bathroom to the cash when I heard this on the news, because for years we've held the unemployment rate to 5% in the belief that that would be keeping inflation under control. And it turns out that we didn't need to do that the economy would not collapse into an inflation hellhole if more people were allowed to find work. As you've said a number of times on the podcast, Steve, we have deliberately kept people out of work to serve as a buffer for the economy. And it turns out that the buffer didn't need to be 5%. It could actually operate quite nicely at 3.5%.
Well, it also turns out that the thing driving inflation is not wages anyway. Like some nice analysis done recently by the Australia Institute, and hello, Richard, if you're listening, clearly showed that actually the thing that is having a much bigger impact on prices at the moment are corporate profits. Companies are increasing their prices because everyone seems to expect them to be going up, because world events means that there's like this sort of free pass to increase rates, to increase prices. And no one will give you a hard time about it, because it's one of those things that there's an inflation thing, so prices are going up, and there's a gas crisis or an oil crisis or a war in Ukraine, so of course prices are going up. I saw something yesterday that the 5 major oil and gas companies in the world are about to post $50 billion in profits for the quarter.
Oh my God.
For the June quarter, $50 billion in profit for the June quarter. So there you go. Leonie, thoughts from you?
I'm going to move right away from the economy for a moment, and I'm going to go back to the theme that I had earlier about the day after the election, feeling this sense of potential again in who we are as a nation and what we can do. And the Garma Festival speech yesterday, for me, confirmed the possibilities that are open to us again now. Yeah. To have a Prime Minister who, from election night, without hesitation and without any awkwardness, actually just with full heart, commit to the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and to see that come around in 8 weeks and to see that speech was just... I had that moment again of just going, I'm proud again. And, and we have the potential as a country to feel collectively proud and to start doing the work. And it's not going to be easy, and it's a long road ahead, but we need to start doing the bloody work. We need to do the work to actually come together as a country, recognise the shit that's happened. There's a whole lot of shit there that we as a country have been in denial for so long about. And we're just I just feel like it's that point in time again that because he is doing it so early in this parliament, we have potential again. We have possibility. We have hope. So that to me sets an enormous tone about who we are and what we can do.
Yeah. And I agree, Leonie, and I think if I sort of look, Parliament's been sitting for only a matter of days when we record this, and in addition to the Gama Festival, we've seen movement on aged care, we've seen movement on domestic violence, like paid domestic violence leave, like those are good things. We've seen movement on the emissions reduction legislation, and I have my critiques of that, but I agree with you. These have been some really sort of positive shifts.
There's movement at the station.
Yes, and it's a really, really important point, I think, to end on, because having just got done kicking them quite severely for failing to solve the deep-seated structural problems that lead to poverty in this country, we should definitely acknowledge the extraordinary strides that they have made in fixing other deep-seated structural problems, which is Indigenous recognition and healing those deep wounds in the country. And particularly on a weekend when we just learned of the passing of Archie Roach, which is a catastrophic loss for the nation. I mean, what a voice, and in more ways than one. It's so needed. So thank you for bringing us back on track with that, Leonie. And now you do have to run off, but before you go, the Victorian Division has some exciting news for us.
We do. So as of only 48 hours ago or thereabouts, we have put in our paperwork to be a registered party in Victoria, which is really exciting. So we will be ready for the state election this year.
Fantastic.
Yes.
So
proud.
That whole conversation earlier about the need for choice in Victoria and the need for a different sort of conversation and deeper level conversation, that to me has always been what the Democrats are about, and that is absolutely what is needed in Victoria right now too. So yeah, really exciting. I'm super excited for it.
Oh, and we're so proud as well, because I mean, the last couple of years, as we said at the start of the podcast, has actually been on the federal election and getting us ready for that. And so to be able to take strides to then extend our representation at a state level in Victoria so soon after the federal election was extraordinary. And the Victorian team did they worked so hard. They came off the federal election straight into getting everything ready that they needed to get, including, recruiting new members, which is what the advertising that I was referring to earlier was about. The hard work begins now in terms of developing policy platforms that are specific to Victoria. And I think it's going to be a huge ask to expect the Democrats to become a functional opposition in Victoria just yet, but at least you can start laying down that foundation.
Maybe we can show the opposition how it's done.
That's right.
Yeah, I think what the exciting part too that I have already seen in the last few weeks is just the energy of the new members that are joining us as well. And I just want to do a shout out to Ryan Paris, who has been absolutely the tireless person in the background doing extraordinary work to get us to where we are, or where we were on Friday. And Ryan has been having conversations with a number of these new members that have come on board, and it was great to see some of them, in fact, at our exec meeting last week. So new faces and new energy and, excitement about what is possible for Victoria. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
That's really exciting.
Really, really wonderful. And I also have to say thank you to you, Elana, because it wasn't just a Victorian effort. I think this is the beauty of the Democrats and how they work. And so there was significant support at a national level to get that happening and to get that done. And you've been a huge part of getting that happening and support for it happening.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you.
It was so important for us as a party for everyone to pull together and support Victoria, because I know that when the time comes, Victoria will pull together and support New South Wales or support South Australia, WA, when it's our turn to register.
Any party like the Democrats that is absolutely about wanting to connect and represent the people that they are representing, connect with them, have the conversations, have the deeper conversations and improve how democracy functions. That's a party that I want to be a part of.
Absolutely.
And they do exist.
Yes, yeah. It's not all corrupt incompetence. There are
No, it is not.
There are other options available to you people. So, look, Leonie, thank you so much for coming on and having a chat to us. How are you feeling post-election? Like, I'm so glad that you recovered from your COVID, because you also lost your voice for a while, which was
That was after the election.
yeah,
Yes, lost it completely.
which is one of the reasons why the podcast has been a little bit of a hiatus, because it was really, like, in an audio medium, it was really difficult to bring you on board and have a chat about things when you couldn't speak. So definitely have to have you back on again to discuss events in Victoria as they unfold. So fingers crossed. And Steve, always greatest co-host that I could ever hope to have.
Thank you very much.
Yes, no, thank you. And look, Paul Roger couldn't make it tonight, but we'll have a chat with him and see. We'll bring him on and when he's free, and have a chat and see how things went in South Australia as well. Until then, take care, dear listeners, and we'll chat to you soon. Thank you so much to Leonie for joining us and for her patience while Steve and I worked through some unexpected feelings we had about the economy. No doubt they will come up again when we go through the October budget that the Albanese government has planned. Budget nerds have 2 budget episodes to look forward to this year. Leonie has taken on the role of communications officer for the Victorian team in the lead up to the state election, so I'm looking forward to having her back on the podcast to keep us updated on all things Victoria as we head to November. And hopefully soon we'll have lead Senate candidate for South Australia, Roger Yazbek, on for more post-election analysis as the new government and the new opposition settle into what we hope will be a new way of doing politics. We'll see. If you live in Victoria and you'd like to help out the Vic Division with the state election or keep up to date on their progress, you can support us by joining the party, or you can sign up our newsletter at democrats.org.au. The state elections in our other divisions are a bit further into the future, but those teams are also hard at work preparing for state registration and developing state-specific policies, and they would welcome your support as well. The Morrison years might be mercifully over, but as we saw in the federal election, the fight for better, more accountable politics is just beginning. Stay tuned. Keep the Bastards Honest is brought to you by the Australian Democrats. This episode was edited and produced by me, Alana Mitchell. If you'd like to keep in touch, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn by searching for Australian Democrats. And you can see what we stand for, what we value, and what our policy positions are at our website at democrats.org.au. Until next time, thanks for listening.